Have you ever been asked, "Where are you from?" and felt like there was no simple answer? Or maybe you've asked it and without realizing it made someone feel like an outsider. Today's conversation goes deep on exactly that. If you've listened to season one, you'll know that all of my previous episodes were solo. And this season, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm introducing guests to the podcast. And the goal is to introduce our audience to inspiring voices and to learn not just from me, but from their experiences as well. So to set up today's podcast, I recently did a talk at a bank where I discussed the very sensitive topic of where are you from? A question that many of us ask or get asked in networking settings or at work. And if you've not heard the talk, you can listen by checking it out on episode 1 from season 2 or by checking out Boost Academy of Excellence on YouTube, where you can watch the whole talk live. Today's guest attended the talk, and afterwards she messaged me saying how much it resonated with her. And it inspired me to invite her onto the podcast. So today we'll be discussing her experiences as an immigrant to Canada with this question. So without further ado, Salma Khalaf.
Welcome to Boosted, from Unpolished to Promoted. I'm Trina Booz, founder and CEO of Boost Academy of Excellence. As a former recruitment agency CEO who placed thousands of professionals, I now train emerging leaders on the workplace skills that actually get you promoted. In each episode, you'll get actionable tips to build your professional presence and advance your career through real workplace scenarios and human stories. We'll cover the unwritten rules of professional success that nobody teaches you in school. Are you ready to boost your professional game? Let's dive in.
Salma is a Palestinian refugee born and raised in Lebanon, now based in Canada. Salma has worked across government, nonprofit, and banking. Alongside her professional work, Salma is deeply involved in community leadership, youth empowerment, and advocacy. She was the founder and leader of the Girl Up Palestine chapter, which is part of a United Nations Foundation initiative. And she currently serves as vice president on the board of the Canadian Palestinian Social Association. Her work and story are shaped by her personal experiences and by the complexity of answering the question, where are you from? When home, identity, and belonging are not simple or singular. Welcome to Boosted, Salma.
Thank you so much for having me, Trina. I'm excited to be your first guest for the season 2 of this episode.
So maybe we'll start just at the beginning. If you could tell us, Salma, a little bit about your journey, tell us about your background and how you came to Canada.
So, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Lebanon as a Palestinian refugee. It has always been my father's dream to move to Canada, but unfortunately, at the time, back in the 90s, he didn't have the financial means to come here. He didn't even have the financial means to apply for a visa to start with. So as I was growing older and as I was approaching high school, he constantly implanted this idea in my head of, you're going to be studying abroad. Your dreams are going to be achieved. Your dreams will be bigger than mine. Finances will never limit your dreams. And so when I was 17, I applied to universities in the US and Canada. I got accepted into both. I got accepted to 6 universities actually in the US and almost 3 in Canada. So I did have good options, but I was inclined more towards the US because I had a few friends who went there and I didn't know anyone in Canada. So I thought maybe it's better to just, follow some friends. So I did my undergrad in the US, and then afterwards, it felt right to move to Canada. At the time with the political climate in the US, I felt like maybe it's better to move to a country that would welcome refugees more, and that I've heard so many great stories in terms of how refugees are treated and welcomed and appreciated. So I did that move. And then honestly, one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. My family was able to join me after. And I got to work in government with a member of parliament, and I started my master's in 2024. I just finished it like recently, December 2025. And honestly, overall, I love Canada. It is home for me now.
What strikes me about your story is that, when people ask where you're from, we know can be a very complicated question to ask, but you have this really unique position where no single answer is fully true.
I was actually born and raised in Lebanon. So I've never been to Palestine. Even my father, he was born and raised in Lebanon. So even my dad has never been to Palestine. So that adds another layer of complexity to the question of where you're from, because sometimes when you say I'm Palestinian and you stop there, people ask, so were you born in Palestine? And then when you say no, they're like, so how come you're Palestinian? Because in the West, there's this concept of like the country that you're born in, this is where you got your passport from, and technically this is where you're from. Back home, it works a bit differently. So if you ask me which city exactly are you from in Lebanon, it's not the city I was born in. It's basically where my family originates from, because there's that complex history in the region of you follow your family's bloodline of where they originated from instead of where you were born. Where you were born is just like, it's just a city. It's not where you're from. And also, I think I mentioned in our call the complexity of the passport or the identity. I do not have a Palestinian passport. I do not have a Lebanese passport. And I do not have a Canadian passport as of this moment. So it adds that layer of complexity of, so which country do you belong to in terms of, paper governments and paperwork. So, yeah.
Something that many of us cannot even relate to. You can't even begin to imagine what that would be like, because it really makes, identity is such a big part of how we move around the world. It's so important. I can understand that that is a complicated question. Now, I have a question just around the etiquette of where are you from? We are often told in the workplace, this is not a question that we should really touch. It's not a question we should ask people. And yet it's asked all the time. So when somebody asks this question in a professional setting, do they ever stop to consider what it might mean for the person who's asking? Do you think that has it been asked sort of carelessly in the past, thoughtfully? And what stories can you share about that?
I could definitely see that when people ask this question, it comes from a place of curiosity. Because sometimes you could say, especially since I come from, I want to say, politics background. So in that setting, you are more knowledgeable on certain subjects because of where you come from, because of where you were born and the personal experiences. So for example, I lived through a war when I was 6 years old. So I could relate so much to, for example, kids and youth living through war right now. So when I say that, instantly people are like, in what country did you experience that war? And they wouldn't phrase it as such. They would ask, so where are you from? But I know that their intention is sort of for them to understand my background and, where I was in the world when I experienced that, and like, what are the experiences that shaped me? And as you said, they're very different than a lot of youth in North America. Like, a lot of youth my age in the US and Canada cannot say that they've lived through a war. They've never experienced that personally. Maybe their country did engage in a war in another land, but they couldn't say, oh, I had to be internally displaced, or we had to live through, bombings and whatnot. I mean, almost every person I meet asks me, where am I from? I'm 100% okay with that question. I feel like it depends on the context. Sometimes, I think, as I mentioned to you, it's hard to put my answer into one sentence. And so if this is asked in a quick professional setting, I feel like I'm not doing my background justice. I feel like, oh, I would just say Palestinian, and then I would stop. Because if I say I'm Palestinian, born and raised in Lebanon, and then I go into details, this might spark more questions that we might not have the time to answer. But let's say if we are connecting over a coffee chat or lunch, that's completely fine. We have time to discuss this. So it really depends. It really depends.
Yeah. And, you've probably been asked it in situations where it's been perhaps a little uncomfortable for you because you may not understand perhaps the intent of the question. What is the reason they're asking? And I think that's one of the reasons we often say stay clear of that question, because you never know people's intent. So in what situations does it sort of rub you the wrong way when you're asked that question? And then in what situations do you appreciate being asked?
I think when people are, for example, if we're having heated debates or discussions, and then out of a sudden someone throws in this question of, where are you from? And, I do answer it. And then they make assumptions on my stances on certain things in terms of, I don't know, views and beliefs. This is where it becomes offensive. Sometimes people use this question of where you're from to build scenarios in their head about you, to make pre-assumed assumptions and biases about you. And I feel like this is where it gets unfair. Because although you might belong to country X, you are a person of your own. You have your own experiences, you have your own views. Maybe you do not share the views of the majority of the people in your country. So it's really important that when
Mhm.
you ask this question, it's coming from a place of curiosity and sort of like empathy. So sometimes I do ask that question when I'm trying to understand, for example, why was someone triggered by the mention of violence? Do they come from a country where violence was, prevalent? So I try to understand, to be more empathetic and more humane to them, not from a place where I am
Mhm.
using this as a weapon against them. Oh, you're from that country, so these are the
Yeah.
beliefs you hold, and then attack them based on my assumptions or my biases. So definitely I've had that
Yeah.
happen where, people would make assumptions about me and what I believe in and then argue with me based on
Mhm.
that. And this is where it gets tricky for sure.
Would you say that happens more in your personal life or even professionally as well?
Definitely more in the personal and definitely more in academic settings, I would say. In academic settings, I feel like because the environment and the professors sort of push us to be more critical, so people feel more emboldened to ask questions you wouldn't ask in a professional setting. In the professional setting, I feel like people tend to like listen more because you're working with them long term. I don't think it's in anyone's benefit to start off on the wrong foot or to say something that's insensitive. And also, one thing I love about Canada is the diversity. So almost everyone, not almost everyone basically who's not indigenous to this land is from somewhere. So everyone has a story. And I feel like that's the beauty of it. So that's why, for example, when I share where I'm from, you're automatically sort of, appreciative, or you're listening because you want the same from me when you tell me where you're from. And this is, for example, is not something I experienced like in the American workplace, because you feel like it wasn't like a lot of the people who came, like in the US, for example, a lot of people whom I worked with, for example, shared very, I want to say, conservative views about refugees or immigrants. And this is where you feel like you're not being appreciated in terms of, people appreciating your background or appreciating the new perspective you bring in. But in Canada, it's been a completely different experience. And that's what I love
Hmm.
about here. Yeah,
We live in a great country, don't we?
we
And
do. We do,
That's what
definitely.
I love so much about Canada, and you talk about stories,
Hmm.
storytelling, and everyone has such a unique story that they can bring to a conversation, and so much of it is rooted from who you are, from your background, your identity, your belonging, all of these
Hmm.
things, and we know it has to be treated very much with care, as we're discussing
Hmm.
now, but wow, it can open up such a world, and also can educate you so much too, because I just feel
Yes.
so strongly, yes, we have to be careful with this question, but it educates. And if we're
Hmm.
trying to sort of squash ignorance to really, like we're
Uh,
trying to really share our histories and educate people who sometimes don't have the opportunity to travel to all these other worlds. And this question
yeah.
can be a real connecting question from that perspective.
And I've met friends in the US who like treated those stories with so much care and like so much love. I had a friend specifically who, for example, if she met someone and she could not pronounce their name, she would insist on them repeating their name until she gets it
Yeah.
right. And I took that from her. And she is American, right? So I'm not saying a blanket statement of, oh, all people in the US are a certain group of people. No, I'm just saying sort of my experiences in a more professional setting. Conversations in professional US workspaces tend to take a more political like stance or political
Hmm.
turn. However, in Canada, it's more like people are excited to share their own stories too. So you're from that country? Oh, we do that too in my country, and this is where
Yeah.
I come from as well. And so yeah, I've taken that, I want to say, really good habit of when someone tells me their name and I don't get it the first time, please say it
Yeah.
again, and I intentionally insist.
Yeah.
So
But the name is
yeah.
is so important to people too, right? I have found one of the things I mentioned in my talk was paying close attention
Hmm.
to people's names and the spellings of their names. So when I
Yes.
meet people and if I don't understand what they've said, because sometimes the way names are structured, it's
Hmm.
not what we're accustomed to here in North America. I'll have them spell the name
Hmm.
and I'll have them repeat it, and they appreciate being asked and that someone's taking the care to understand who they are from their name.
I
Yeah.
100% agree.
Okay, so in my talk, I spoke about the GRACE framework, and the whole idea
Hmm.
behind that was to give people a tool that they can use to determine, first of all, should I ever ask this question? If I'm going to ask it, what do I need to consider? And
Hmm.
also how to ask it, gracefully, but then how also to
Yes.
receive this question gracefully.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about how I approached that? And are there any sort of things you think I missed?
I think it's a great framework, in my opinion. I think what I really like about it, the two things I like the most is first one, I think I like the concept of how you receive the question, right? Because sometimes, for example, in the heat of the moment, let's say you're having discussions, and then for some reason, this question pops up in your head. So, like, where's this person from? And you're curious, but it might come off wrong in that context. So I think that humility of we have that concept in my culture of like giving your brother or sister 70 excuses before making bad assumptions about them. So it's like I try to think of that too in my even in my professional work before like making assumptions about what did that person mean? Is that
Mm,
something negative? It's more like come up with 7 excuses why they might have said that before assuming the worst. So I think it connects to that idea nicely of
mm,
think of the good things first before assuming bad or assuming that person has bad intentions for me. And what I also really like about this framework, it's earning, like, I like when you mentioned earning the right to ask it. I feel like that even adds a more layer of like personalization. And this is where you can even become friends with that person and build that connection and have like an ally, whether it's at work or even academics or whatever you're at. So I really like that concept. And sometimes something I do, for example, if I'm really curious about where someone is from and we are in a large group of people, I would approach them individually and ask that in private, or ask it one on one. Because I always think sometimes people are not comfortable with answering that question. Because, for example, if they said I was born and raised in Canada, but then I'm interested, let's say, about their ethnicity, like where is your family from? A lot of people are not comfortable answering that question because they feel
mm.
I'm Canadian. And they say I am Canadian, and they don't mention that say their ethnicity or where they're ethnically from, and they're not comfortable saying that,
Yeah.
and that's understandable and that's fine. So like maybe approaching that with care, as you said, and sort of like understanding the context of like if I'm really curious, where and how to ask that question for sure.
Mhm. I love the 7 what did you say before making assumptions?
Se- have 70 excuses for them. So give them the benefit of the doubt and have 70 excuses. So, for example, if you come to me and you're like, Selma, why did you do that? Before I assume she's attacking me, she's doubting my work, my intentions, I come up with 70 excuses why you're asking that. Maybe you
Wow.
don't understand what I said. Maybe,
Um,
I list positive excuses as to why you might have said that to me.
I have goosebumps. Like, that is so beautiful. I love that. I love that. I think the reason that resonates so well with me is, I think we often look at what people are doing and we put it back to us. We're like, "Oh, well, it's probably because of this," and we focus
Hmm.
on sort of ourselves, and then kind
Hmm.
of you get hurt 'cause you're like, "Well, that person didn't I did
Hmm.
something kind to them. I didn't, they didn't say thank you. I never heard from them again," or whatever it is. And then you realize, oh my goodness, they
Hmm.
were diagnosed with cancer and they're
Hmm.
going through something. I had no idea. And so you're right, like really giving people the benefit of the doubt and thinking through all of these scenarios. And yeah, because it sort of like takes yourself out of the equation all the time. Your brain
Yes.
does like to go there. So to be focused on others, that
Yeah,
is
and
beautiful. I
actually
love
think
that.
of it this way, as much as you're concentrated on yourself, other people are concentrated on themselves too. So you might do something or say something in the heat of the
Mhm.
moment, and then you're like, oh my God, everyone is thinking about this. And then 2 days pass, and you might still think everyone is thinking about this. Trust me, 5 minutes after that conversation, everyone forgot what was happening. I wouldn't say forgot, but like they moved on. They moved on. So many things
Yeah.
happen in life, and people, everyone is going through something. I 100% believe that. And also back to the question of where you're from,
Yeah.
a lot of things sometimes happen back home that affect us. So I might be physically in Canada, but mentally, I'm dividing my mental energy on so many things, right? So that's another layer to it.
And a lot of people around you can't even understand or relate to it,
No, you're right. Yeah.
right? Yeah, which is that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone going about their days and you're just silently sort of
Mm-hmm.
struggling and suffering. Yeah. So that is why it's such a complicated
It
question
is.
too, because you don't know what's happening in the
Mm-hmm.
background. But I think in doing that talk, I had a lot of people approach me
Mm-hmm.
after and really share some personal things. And people, one in particular, was just saying, I've never wanted to
Mm,
share where I'm from because I'm nervous that people will judge me
mm,
and they'll make some sort of like assumption as to who I am, just like what you're
yes.
saying, your background, your belief system,
Yes.
whatever it is. And so instead, she answers with a very generic answer, which doesn't really say where she's
Yes.
from, but more so like, yeah, very generic. And she said, Trina, I'm going through this journey of self discovery
Mm-hmm.
right now, and I'm going to start being proud and
Yes.
I'm going to start saying where I'm from. And it was just really touching,
Mm-hmm.
that I wasn't sure how this topic would be
Mm-hmm.
received, but it seems that it's people seem appreciative that it's being talked about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. It resonates big time. And I think for me, coming into North America, I was also very much hesitant to even mention like Palestine. A lot of people, whenever they hear that word, or even like they hear the name of other countries from the Middle East, they think politics. And I'm like, it's more than that, right? If you ever get the chance, or I'm not sure if you've visited, but for you or the viewers, if you've ever had the chance to visit or will visit one of these countries, they're beautiful. The history, like I always say this, like you can, for example, see all of Lebanon in one day, in 4 hours. You don't get that in Canada. Like 4 hours would barely get you from, I don't know, Windsor, Ontario to Toronto. And you're just like that. That's like a very small part of Ontario, not even, Canada as a whole. So like the
Hmm.
history, the culture, the people, the social life, beautiful. And I feel like that should be what define us in that region. Whenever people hear the word Middle East or countries that belong to the Middle East, they think certain stuff. And I feel like I do want to change that narrative. We're fun
Hmm.
people. We love life. It's the conditions that were, I want to say, placed on us that made us, I don't know, or I want to say the wrong narratives that have been spread about us all our lives that have
Hmm.
shaped certain biases about us. But we are highly educated. Palestinians are among the highly educated in the world. The amount of Palestinians who hold PhDs, who are doctors, the amount of, like, I'm not sure if you know this as a fact. So there's only 6 million Lebanese nationals in Lebanon. But do you know how many Lebanese expats there is? Do you
How
you
many?
can you give an estimate of the number of Lebanese who live outside of Lebanon? Any number.
Oh gosh. I'll say 10 million.
You're close. 18 million. There's 18 million Lebanese people living outside of Lebanon. So like that's how widespread we are.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, I would say this as a fun
Hmm.
fact. Like Shakira has Lebanese roots. Like Shakira, the famous Colombian artist, she has
Uh-huh.
Lebanese roots. So like we are widespread, and we do love life, and we do love spreading our culture. And I feel like what your talk did is give people that space to bring up that beautiful part of who we are. So I feel
Oh,
like
it's
that question of
beautiful.
where you're from, it either could be so heavy, and you give me flashbacks of so many, I want to say, ugly stuff, or it could be that, oh, let me show you pictures of our food, of our dances, of our traditional clothing, of that. It could be
Hmm.
either or. And it depends on how
Yeah.
safe you make that
Yeah.
person feel.
Wow. By the way, I love Lebanese food, including, is it mahmoul? Mahmoul?
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Oh
sweet.
my
Yes.
gosh. Do you make that?
My grandma used to do it. My aunt does it. My mom is, I mean, she's done it sometimes, but me, no. So it's more like older
Okay.
generations. I'm not so much into cooking, but yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, if your grandma's here and she's making her next batch, let me know.
For sure. Actually, my parents, this is a funny story. My parents do get sweets from Lebanon. And then people whom I used to work with, because even when I leave a workspace, I try to have like a very good connection. And again, we build these like personal connections. I bring them sweets. I'm like, hey, my parents are back in Canada. I got sweets for you. So they love it. For sure. I'll
Oh,
keep that
that's
in mind for
lovely.
the next time they come. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And yeah, it's such a fascinating topic. I'm going to probably have some others on the podcast to also share their experiences with the question. And I know will learn a lot. And the whole goal as well is to share that knowledge with the viewers.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you for holding this space in sort of, I want to say, even like a professional setting. Um, sometimes it's like really motivating and really it sets, I want to say, the ground for the bigger picture. Like when I reflect on my background, where I'm from, and all the, like I shared some of my writing with you recently. It's part of the anthology that was, published. And I do talk about how, for example, my grandmother, whom I was named after, she did not know how to like read and write. And now here I am with like a master's degree, having a
Mhm.
job and, traveled alone and all of that. So definitely, I love having these conversations because they do remind me of why I do what I do, whether it's a national setting or a bigger picture. Yeah.
Thank you. For anyone listening who finds themselves on the receiving end of this question and who struggles with how to answer it, what would you want them to know?
What do I want them to know? Everyone has a beautiful story. I know this might sound a bit cliche, but you are unique in your own ways. So I meet other people who are from Lebanon and I learn new things myself. Whether it's, a different saying or a different story, you might come even from the same neighborhood as someone and you both have very diverse, distinct experiences. So what I would love the viewer to know when, you're being asked this question of where you're from, do not be afraid or ashamed of where you're from. Share your story as you see it. And sometimes, for example, if I do feel that question is heavy or it's coming on the heavy end of things, sometimes I say Canada. So whatever seems easier to you to answer in the moment, to take care of yourself and to take care of your, feelings and emotions, do it. And there's nothing wrong, for example, saying Canada's home, because it is home for me. But I know there's, maybe other layers of complexity and identity that shape me and whatnot. But do what sounds right to you in the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, your story is a very powerful illustration of why this question matters and why we need to ask it with so much care
Mhm.
and curiosity. So, thank you for being willing to share it. And for our listeners, let us know, where can we connect with you?
The listeners can connect with me through LinkedIn. I think that's the best platform to find me. Yeah, I am active on Instagram, but I do prefer LinkedIn. I feel like it's more professional. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, look forward to following along and seeing what amazing things you're doing out in the world.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thanks.
Take care, Sama.